Today I'm going to teach you how to play the killer Scandinavian Defense, and you're going to know how to play the Scandi like a pro. This is the top-notch theory when it comes to the Scandinavian Defense, so stay tuned. But before we begin, if you want to support the channel, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel down below. There's a button that you can click, and you can turn on the notification bell as well, and you receive notifications whenever I post new videos. Now let's go to the moves. The Scandinavian Defense begins when your opponent plays e4 and you respond by playing d5. This is the beginning, the starting position of the Scandinavian Defense. More often than not, your opponent is going to take and you capture back with the queen. The most common move here is knight to c3, attacking our queen. But we also see some situations when your opponent plays knight to f3. We're going to see this. We're going to come back to this later on. But this is the most common move, attacking our queen, winning a tempo on the queen. We're going to slide the queen to a5. Every Scandinavian player knows this line so far. And from here on, your opponent might play d4 or knight to f3 here, but it doesn't matter. It's probably going to transpose to the same position after we play knight to f6. More often than not, your opponent is going to play this move right here. There are some other options, though. We're going to take a look at them later on, okay? So the most common move here is knight to f3, developing the two knights before the bishops. And here, I prefer playing this move, bishop to f5 here. And why is that? Because a lot of people prefer playing this move here, bishop to g4. And what is the problem with this move right here? Is that your opponent might play this move, kicking your bishop away, and after you drop it back, they might keep pushing you away. And after you do this, they might play this move and you're gonna have to give up the bishop. And that's not really good. If your opponent knows this line, you're gonna be in a disadvantage probably. So that's why I prefer just playing bishop to f5 here, which is a much better move in this case. So the most common move here, according to the Lichess database, is this move here, bishop to d2, trying to prepare some discovered attacks on your queen. So what to do against that, guys? We have to play c6. Whenever we see that move, we play c6, preparing like a escape square here for our queen in case this knight moves and unleashes the bishop against our queen. So we have to keep in mind that this move is a safe move, so we are preparing some escape squares for our queen just in case, okay? So if this pawn is pushed, we can consider making this move right here. It's not the case now because the pawn is here blocking our bishop. But if the pawn is pushed, we can consider playing this bishop here. We're going to see this in some of the lines. Okay, our opponent is probably going to play bishop to c4, developing the bishop. We're going to play knight b to d7, preparing to recapture this knight in case they take this knight. We can recapture with the knight, avoiding any compromises to our pawn structure, okay? So we can play this move right here. Queen to e2 is very common. We are going to play queen to c7, dropping our queen back because now it's a real threat to do the discovered attack to our queen. And after opponent castles long, we're going to play e6, closing the diagonal over there. After knight to e5, we're going to push h5, preventing any moves right here from this pawn, because if this pawn moves, guys, if they push this pawn, we have to drop the bishop back and we're going to be ending without the bishop. We're going to lose the bishop pair. So it's very interesting for us to play this move h5, preventing any moves, any pawn moves from our opponent. After king to b1, quiet move from our opponent, we can take the central knight, and after they recapture, we're going to play knight to d5, preparing something very interesting here. If our opponent takes our central knight, we're not going to recapture with the pawn. Instead, we're going to actually play a very interesting move. Bishop takes c2 with check, forcing our opponent to take the bishop. And after they take the bishop, now we capture the knight with this very interesting pin on the bishop down here. If the opponent plays some other move like, for example, king here, we can take the bishop with the pawn, and it's a very strong attack here against the king. Of course, this happens after opponent plays this move right here. But of course, opponent doesn't have to go for that. They might play bishop to c4. It's another possibility. In this case, we're just going to play e6. Whenever opponent goes with the bishop right here, we have to remember this move is going to make this bishop look stupid because it's going to be staring at the pawn chain. So we have to remember to play this move e6 right here. And after the opponent goes bishop here to prepare the discoveries, now we have this move with the bishop because the pawn was pushed. So we don't have to play this move right here now. We can actually go for bishop b4. And after your opponent tries to kick the bishop away, playing a3, we can trade. And after they take, we can just drop the queen back. And in this position, your opponent might go for a quiet move like castling or an aggressive move, advancing the pawn to d5. All we have to keep in mind is if they castle, we can actually put our knight here. If they don't castle and push this pawn, we cannot put the knight here, so we will have to develop this knight over there. So if the opponent pushes the pawn, we have to develop the knight to another square, knight b to d7. After opponent castles, we can castle as well. Bishop to d4 is going to be attacking our queen, but we're going to strike with c5 against our opponent, forcing them to take en passant, and then we're going to take back with the queen, hitting the other bishop, forcing them to maybe retreat, in which case, after they retreat, we can end up trading the bishops. We can follow along with that, along those lines, okay? If opponent goes for castling instead of pushing the pawn to d5, we can actually develop this knight over here. So we can go with knight to c6. This allows us to put the knight in a more active position. After, let's say, a4 trying to attack our queen, we're going to push a5, preventing any other advancement on the queen side. After, let's say, b3, we're going to castle long, and we are already exerting some pressure over here, pinning this pawn against the queen. After, let's say, bishop to d2, we can play bishop to g4, pinning the knight. And after, let's say, c3, we can take advantage over the many pins that we have and play knight to e5. Now we have a very good advantage. This is -1 for black. Pretty good position for us, okay? Of course, opponent might go for some different moves in these positions, but these are the most common moves, of course. So we have to keep that in mind, okay? So what can happen here is instead of your opponent developing this knight here, which is the most common move, they can go for the bishop moves first. This is a possible move, bishop to d2 right away, or bishop to c4. And we have to know what to do in these cases. In case your opponent goes for bishop to d2, trying to prepare some discovered attacks against our queen, we can go ahead and play bishop to g4. And we are attacking the queen, forcing our opponent to play f3 and block the diagonal. We're going to drop our bishop back, and after they play bishop to c4, preparing some discovered attacks against our queen, we can actually play queen to b6, getting away from the line of the bishop. They are going to develop the knight. We play e6, blocking the diagonal, making our opponent's bishop look stupid. After a3, we can play bishop to e7, preparing to castle next move. After bishop to e3, we can play c5. After the opponent advances the pawn, we can take. After the opponent takes, we take back with the knight. After they take with the queen, we can play bishop to e6, attacking the queen. After the queen moves away, we can capture the bishop. They retake with the queen, but we can take the pawn on b2. Opponent's going to castle, we can play knight to c6. After they take the pawn with the bishop, we can trade bishops. And then we can play this move, queen to e5, in case our opponent decides to trade queens. We take back with the knight, and we have a great position in this case as well, okay? But instead, if the opponent decides to go for bishop to c4 in this position, instead of playing bishop to d2, we can do the same thing. We can attack the queen, forcing the opponent to block the diagonal. Knight to c6 is our next move, preparing to castle long. We can castle long after knight to d5, releasing this attack against our queen. We can safely move it to a4. Our queen is running out of squares, but this is pretty safe. After the bishop moves, attacking our queen again, we can drop it back to a6, preventing white from castling and attacking the pawn, the central pawn. So after Our opponent takes the knight. We take it back with the pawn. Bishop to e3 is going to be probably the move from our opponent. And against that, we're going to take the central pawn, forcing our opponent to take back with the bishop. And boom, we check bishop to b4, okay? After the opponent blocks the check, we check again with the rook, rook h to e8 check. After the king moves away, we can take the bishop, and there are so many pins working here. The opponent will have to make some concessions. The best move here is actually taking this rook with the knight. We take the queen, and after they take back the bishop, we're actually trading the rook and bishop for the queen, and this is a great game for us. This is minus 2.5 for black. It's a great game for us. Okay, so these are the most common moves that white can go for, and we have to know how to respond against that. But going back to the beginning, we know that it's possible for our opponent to actually play a different move here and go for knight to f3 instead of playing knight to c6, which is the c3, which is the most common move. In this case, we're going to right away pin the knight here, and when we do that, they're probably going to respond by breaking the pin. We play knight to c6, preparing to castle long very, very quickly. After d4, we can castle long. And after castling, our opponent has some options here. They can go for the bishop to e3, or they can push the c4 pawn, the pawn to c4 actually. So let's imagine they go for the push, and they push pawn to c4. In this case, we're going to move our queen away, queen to f5, and we're attacking 2 points here. We're attacking the knight and the central pawn, which is pinned actually. So opponent has to play bishop to e3, defending the pawn. But in that case, we just take the knight. After they take back, we can go ahead and take the central pawn. After the opponent recaptures with the bishop, we can play this interesting move, queen to e6, check. Opponent cannot block with the bishop because it's pinned, so they have to block with the other bishop. And after they do that, they're actually leaving a lot of things hanging here. We're going to play this move, queen to e4, attacking many positions here. After knight to c3, let's say, we can go ahead and take the central bishop. If the opponent trades queens, that's good for us. After queen to a4, we can go ahead and check queen to d2, check. After king moves away, we can go ahead and grab the pawn. This is free for the taking. Opponent is probably going to play rook to b1. We're going to take the knight. We're up a piece now. And after queen takes the pawn on a7, this might look a little bit dangerous, but we have everything under control. We have to move e6 to open the squares for the bishop. After queen takes b7 with check, we have to move our king away. After rook to d1 check, we just cover the square with the bishop, bishop to d6, and we're safely up a piece in this position, which is pretty good. Of course, opponent can go for a different move, for example, bishop to e3, which is another possibility. In this case, we're just going to strike in the center, taking advantage of the pin. After the opponent takes the pawn, we are going to take the knight. And the bishop is protecting the queen just in case your opponent decides to trade queens. We're going to recapture with the bishop, and we are up a piece again. So opponents might go for something different. They might take the bishop after queen takes e5. We have a lot of attacks going on. The queen is under attack. They have to move it away. So they move it to protect the pawn. Queen to c1. Then we continue our development. After knight to f6, they take. We can take it back. And white's gonna castle. We can play bishop to d6 in this position, preparing mate in the h2 square. So white has to respond against the mate threat. They're going to push the pawn to g3. We're going to play knight to g4, attacking the bishop. After bishop moves to f4, attacking our queen, we're going to play queen to h5, renewing the mate threat. So white has to respond. They're going to play h4. We're going to play bishop to c5, preparing to take the pawn on f2. And after that, moving the queen to d1, winning the queen, and lots of very interesting things going on here. After knight to c3, trying to hold on to the position, we play rook to the center of the board, preparing to advance our pawns, and this is a great position for us. So basically, guys, this is the top-notch theory on the Scandinavian defense. We have all the sidelines covered, all the best lines possible here for black to get an advantage. If you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and as always, I see you guys in the next one.